Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. Before we begin, I think I don't know if Emma Cole and Taylor Forney are giving out prizes on these days. It's great to see so many people dressed in white, but I think we have to give special recognition to these two gentlemen sitting down here to my left, Mr. Showalter and Mr. Suter. I think you have to stand up now. This is quite the ensemble that they have put together for the whiteout today. Wow. Yes. Very impressive. I'm afraid to ask what comes next, so we'll just go with stand up, acknowledge the crowd, and sit down. Well done, guys. Well done. One advantage to having our meeting today, everybody. Hopefully the snowplows will get the streets clear by the time we're done, and you'll have smooth sailing on the way home. Because rumor has it it's not too good out right now, so this will give us a little time to catch up. All right, so there's a positive for everybody being here this afternoon. Again, thank you for being here, and we are devoting our entire meeting today to a couple of guest speakers. And before I turn it over to Susan Schrader to do the real formal introduction, I will say one of the presenters is a GHS alum from the class of 2012, Brooke Mayer. I think Jackie's trying to claim she's from the class of 2012. That's Jackie Rhew on your right to my left. She is the co-founder of the Center for Emotional Wellness. She was here back in December and met with our student services team. She's here to share information with us today. And we were going to have a parent presentation this evening, but a couple of weeks ago we rescheduled that for an evening in April. So we'll look forward to Jackie being back in our building and working and advising and just giving advice, I guess, to our parent community as well. So I'm going to turn this over to Susan Schrader, who's going to introduce today's presentation.
Hi, everyone. So Jackie is here with Brooke today to really kind of talk about the impact you have on your students. They work with the students from a different aspect with the mental health, anxiety, school avoidance. So it's kind of connecting that piece of what we do here and what they do and how that's impacting our students today. One thing I'm going to ask of you, I'll send you some stuff after the presentation, but knowing that Jackie's coming back in April to talk to our parents, after you hear her message today, if there's things that you think we need to emphasize with our parents, please let me know as we try and build that presentation. You know our students, you deal with our parents all the time, the message we want to give them in April. So kind of think about that as they're talking and then let me know what you think. Okay? All right?
How are you guys doing? I just drove from Lake Zurich, so the roads are pretty good, so I was just told we can take all up till 4 o'clock. Is that good? So I'm Jackie Rhew, and we're gonna keep it light. We're gonna go over some things. Part of what we're talking about, which many of you know, is just how important relationships are. And just want to start off by letting you know you don't always see the impact you make on students, right? You don't always see kind of the evolution process, right? You see them right now. You might get some stories. How many of you get phone calls after they graduate? And you might see students when they're not always at their best, and you might not always know what happens. One thing I often say to parents is just because your child is struggling today, that is not an indicator that they're not going to be successful tomorrow. In fact, many of us in this room went into this field because we struggled at some point. And so when you have kids in front of you that are struggling, I want you to keep that in mind. Much like you don't always know what an impact you make and how much your interactions mean to them. And so I founded the Center for Emotional Wellness about 7 years ago, and I've been fortunate enough. Brooke is one of my therapists there that she works in Crystal Lake, and she's going to talk just a couple moments about how you all have impacted her as she graduated from here a couple years ago.
Yes, thank you, Jackie. So as Jackie and Mr. Rogers mentioned, I did graduate from here in 2012, and I'm now a therapist and the clinical engagement coordinator with Jackie at the center. I just want to share a short story quick, as some of you may know in this room who were there to support me when I was at GHS. 13 years ago today, actually, my mom passed away. And so when Jackie mentioned to me that she was coming to talk to Geneva, it was an opportunity for me to come share to you guys the impact all of the teachers here and the staff had on me when I was a student here. From the support service staff calling and checking in on me and my brother, to calling us down to their office to check in on us, to many familiar teachers. I was telling Dean Schrader as they walked in, oh, there's my math teacher, there's my science teacher, you know, supporting us and understanding the really dark times we were going through, to even just the community feeling of Geneva and how much, you know, support and understanding goes into this town. You know, something I really pride Geneva on is putting mental health first and not always focusing just solely on the academics. And that's really shown, you know, by everything that the teachers did for us. Not only myself, but I know a lot of other my friends or people I know that went through Geneva and hard times they faced as well really felt supported and understood here. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of the staff here and share a little bit of my own story as we are talking about being able to engage our students here at Geneva. So thank you all.
You know, as we get started, and you know, just a little bit about me, I present to about three or four schools, sometimes a week in districts, and I talk a lot to parents. I've been doing this for 25 years. I actually started off overseas, and I started a counseling program in Kuwait shortly after the Gulf War, and my passion has been school and family engagement for a long time. And just a little bit about me, I have 2 kids myself that are now adults, so I come at it from the perspective of a parent and a professional. My oldest is actually a school social worker in CPS, and my youngest is a computer science engineer. So it's interesting, I have 2 girls a year apart, and they're totally different. And that's one thing we talk a lot about, that each child is really going to be unique. Even though kids might score certain scores on test scores, that does not necessarily mean they can handle as much stress as another student, right? We know that. We know every student's different in terms of what they can handle. Anyone else adopt a dog in COVID? I was that person where empty nesters adopted a dog. Love to give back, and I promote self-care. I think for me, I know you all are probably sick of hearing about self-care, but I get up every morning and I run and I get outside even in the winter because I need that for me. I can't do what I'm doing all day long without making sure I'm taking care of myself. And so as we get started, how many of you use this in your classes? I love all the different SEL stuff we're seeing, because I think one of the things I talk a lot about is when I'm talking to parents and I'm treating families, my job is not to make your child happy, it's to help your child be healthy. And part of it is sending a message to our kids that it's okay to feel other than fine and happy, that we want to teach our kids that it's okay just to feel and have that space. Which one are you guys feeling today? Who's feeling number 4? Checking in with our students about it's okay to feel, right? Maybe number 7, maybe number 9. Anyone 9 in the room? You're so excited to go home and just like drive in the snow. Kids love talking about this. And one thing I say to kids routinely, even though I'm a therapist, I'm not here to make you happy. I'm not here to make you feel better. I'm here to teach you how to feel. And I'm here to teach you it's okay to feel. And it's not a bad thing to be sad, or it's not a bad thing to be angry. It's how you learn to deal with it. But so often as adults, we do a great job of wanting to make kids feel better, but we need to be there with them and allow them to feel. Does that make sense? And so a lot of schools and a lot of classrooms are using this SEL just to even check in with kids in the beginning and kind of normalizing some of this for them. I started the school anxiety program at Amita Health. I'm not at the hospital anymore, but these are some things that we're seeing. We're getting a lot of calls. I would say most of you know that we are in a mental health crisis. Hospitals have waiting lists. Some have been trying to refer one at one of the local hospitals, and we've been 3 months we've been waiting to get in. So there's waiting lists, and we know that there's a shortage right now of resources. We're seeing a lot of kids reporting mental health, more anxiety. Are you guys seeing that too? I think we have to be mindful that we do have a tendency, and I'm going to say just on anxiety for a second, I think sometimes we overuse that word, and I think we have to be careful of that too, because I think sometimes we take away from a child's experience if we call everything anxiety. And I think that's the buzzword now. You're so anxious, it's so anxiety provoking, where really there might be other things going on for that student as well. But these are some of the things we're seeing. Are you guys seeing anything else that's not on that list? Self-injury, I'm seeing a spike in self-injury too, and that's not on the list. Depression.
Avoidance.
Avoidance of work. And that's one thing, you know, the technology addiction, I think, is big. And not only is the technology addiction, I think, an issue, but also just what we're seeing on social media. This portrayal of you're supposed to have everything together, things are supposed to work out. You know, one of the high school kids I was presenting with a few weeks ago talked about being a high schooler, you're starting to be taught that, you know, going to bed, there should be like a 5-step facial ritual that goes with it. Like we're supposed to like spend all this time on our face and our clothes, and we're supposed to have it all together. And many kids will come into my office and they'll say, I'm just so scared I'm not going to be successful. And I'm like, you're 5. And they laugh. I see kids as young as 5 coming in my office stressed out that they're not going to be okay. How do you all make your students feel safe and connected, like Brooke talked about? How do you make students feel safe and connected? What are some things you do in the classroom? Joke around with them? Use their names. I love that. Calling by name. Listen. Talk about their experiences. Using the right pronoun and calling a student by name can be huge. Being mindful of just who the student is and maybe knowing something about them. Students tell me all the time, and I used to get this when I was at the hospital, I don't think, you know, I don't think they care about me, or I don't think this person cares about me. And then I would hear a student say, God, I love this teacher. What do you love about that teacher? What do you love about that class? They know something about me. They talk to me by name. They email me when I'm not there. Those small things really, really do make a difference. And what are some ways you engage your students? What are some things that you do to actively engage your students?
Critiques in like an art class where they have to look at each other's artwork but write something quietly by themselves so that way they're prepared to share with the group so they're not on the spot.
Okay, good. Like off to the side, like one-on-one?
If we're doing like a full group, because
Yeah.
they can like get their thoughts together first
Yeah.
and write down some thoughts and then they can share.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. What are some other ways you engage students? And maybe think about things that like help you to become engaged. I know one of the things I do, and we even joke about it with some of the kids I work with, and some of the kids I work with struggle with basic social skills, and I don't know if that's a reflection of them being on their electronics so much or just where they're at, but we'll even start the first couple minutes of the session with, I'll say something like, hey, how are you? What do you think they usually say? Right, and then do you think they ask me how I'm doing? No, so I wait. And I wait. And they're like, what are you waiting for? And I'm like, I'm waiting for you to ask me how I am. And we practice having conversations back and forth. We practice asking for help. Many of the kids I work with are really intelligent, but they struggle asking for help, problem solving, they struggle having conversations, and they struggle accepting criticism, feedback. They have a hard time with that. And so we practice giving feedback. We practice having, dealing with someone that you don't like. You know, I never say to a student, all your teachers love you at Geneva High School. One of you might have a teacher that doesn't like you. You might have a teacher that's difficult to deal with. How are we going to navigate that? How are we going to deal with that relationship? You know, there's different ways to engage students, and there's going to be some students that are harder to engage than others. I think we're going to find that more and more kids are in electronics, and it can be more challenging. Some kids have a harder time just engaging. Some kids might shut down. When I started that program at the hospital, one thing we did is we had kids when they were at the hospital and they were about to come back to school do an about me sheet, and I would have them write down a couple sentences about them, a couple things that were uncomfortable for them at school, and a couple things that they did to regulate and to manage in the classroom. And they said when teachers had that information, they found it really helpful, and they found that they were more engaged because they wanted the teachers to know something about them. And it's interesting, and I don't use the word anxiety as much anymore. I use the word uncomfortable when I'm dealing with students. What are situations that are uncomfortable for you about school? I'll even have a list of situations that I'll give them, and I'll ask them to circle all the situations that are uncomfortable for them about school, and then we talk about opportunities to practice the things that are uncomfortable. Because we know the more we avoid things that make us uncomfortable, the more we develop this belief that we can't handle it. And we've seen that with the pandemic. I think many of us thought we would get back to school and things would be okay. But what we've seen is many of these kids got out of practice, they got out of routine, and they're rusty. So now we have to work on setting those realistic expectations. Because many, and I say this to parents all the time, again, your child might be a little bit rusty, we have to practice. It doesn't mean that everything's terrible and awful, it means that we have to practice. I'm not going to go into this just for time. I'm a therapist and I've never looked at a child. I don't look at them as broken or mentally ill even. Every child's different, and I started this many years ago, and I talk about this when we're talking about AP and honors classes. Every child is different in terms of where they are intellectually, physically, emotionally, their language. So you might have a student who's a sophomore, scores really, really high on standardized tests, emotionally really struggles to regulate, might even engage in some behaviors. Maybe the student looks a lot older than they are and has a hard time articulating their needs. You have to weigh that in when you're thinking about what they can handle in terms of stress. If we overload them with stress that they don't have the skills to manage, what happens is they typically shut down and they start to avoid. So what I work with parents on is, yes, the child might be really bright intellectually, but where are they emotionally? Can they manage, how much stress can they manage according to their skills? And we walk through and we start to have those conversations. I had 2 girls a year apart, pretty similar in terms of intelligence and test scores. One is a lot like me and likes to be busy and thrives in a heavy schedule. The other one is a lot like my husband. They work and that's it. They like to downtime and TV, and they were just two different kids. So the younger one could handle a lot more, and the older one needed a lot more breaks and less classes than high school. Both came out fine. But if I had overtaxed the older one, she would have been burnt out and she would have hated school. How many of you are feeling stress? Many of us are feeling stress. If we don't manage it, if we don't set realistic expectations, that stress can build. It can cause physical issues. It can start to weigh us down. Many students, again, out of the routine are talking about anxiety. They're out of that routine. You might have some kids that don't come to school, that avoid things that make them anxious. We're trying to work with parents on the back end of different strategies. For some students, it's not about anxiety about being to school. It's about anxiety about getting here, that anticipatory anxiety, where they fear something bad's going to happen or they fear they can't handle it. So we're trying to work again on recognizing what are those situations that are uncomfortable. Some kids with ADHD and anxiety are more prone to video game addiction. We're seeing a heightened rise in video game addiction when parents are trying to limit the video game addiction. How do you think the kids are responding? Pissed?
Aggressively, because they're not learning how to compensate.
Right.
They don't have their opposing source.
Right. They're aggressive, or they might just shut down, or some of the kids are threatening to harm themselves. So what happens with parents when that happens with their kids? Parents say, my child can't handle the limits, so I'm not going to set the limits. My child can't handle it. And often I'll talk to parents about when our kids are struggling emotionally, pain management, emotions, they need more structure, not less, but so often we end up giving less structure when our kids start to struggle emotionally. It's very challenging. The video game addiction is hard. Parents are doing what they can, but it's a fine line. You don't want to just say to parents, take it away. We have to equip parents with how to start to set those limits in a safe way. Same thing with school refusal. I don't say to a parent, you just get your kid to school and I'll do the rest, because I don't want that parent becoming violent or physically attacking that child and having all that occur just so the child comes to school. It's not going to be healthy, and that's going to create more trauma. Some students that you have trauma. You don't know necessarily who's been impacted by trauma. You can't necessarily see it on a person, so you don't always know what's going on with the student. And like I said, we know that many of our students, and this is the one thing you can work on. I was talking to a high school kid last night. She said, I'm just such a failure. I'm not good at school. We have to help our kids really to start to set expectations. What does success look like? Success is going to look different for every child. What does it truly look like? And how do you start to challenge yourself and view that as success? But these are just some things, and you all can have the PowerPoint that we've talked about and that we're routinely trying to talk about with students. But these are where confidence is huge too. You know, one thing I like to work on, and if you guys call it problem-solving teams or solution-finding teams? Problem-solving. You know, a lot of times we like to think about it as solution-finding, but we also like to challenge what is your mindset, because you're going to respond differently to a child you view as lazy versus a child you view as needing more of a relationship with you. You know, and you might be with your colleagues talking about a student. Maybe you're talking about Brooke, and one of you's like, God, that Brooke's such a pain in the ass, man. She's not motivated. She doesn't want to do work. She just shuts down. And maybe another one of you are like, God, I think Brooke just needs more of a relationship with the staff. She needs more of a champion in the building. God, maybe Brooke just doesn't know how to regulate. Maybe we need to co-regulate with her, because maybe the more we get ramped up and agitated, the more she's shutting down. Maybe we just need to kind of don't try harder, try different. So one of the things I try to do is I try to check my mindset, right? None of us are perfect. But if I catch myself in that place where I'm like, I'm just so frustrated with this family, I'm just so frustrated with this kid, I try to flip it and kind of check it, because I know a lot of times it's more about me than it is about the child. Does that make sense? So one thing you can even do, an exercise, is write down all your students' names in your class on a piece of paper and put a couple words that you would use to describe each student, and then start to kind of challenge yourself on, is there a need behind that behavior? Is there something else going on with that student that maybe we can take a look at? And this has helped me a lot, because I get stuck. There's cases I get, and I get really frustrated and I get stuck. And so a lot of times it is about me shifting and thinking about what is going on, and what's going on with me, that I'm reacting this way, and what's going on with the child. You know, just in terms of engagement, and we don't have a lot of time to go into this, but think about things that make you engaged when you're in the building. Actually going to move to this one. You know, do your students come to school and believe they can be successful? Do you feel like most of your students come to school and believe they can be successful? That's a good thing, because you think about that. You think about the kids that have struggled, and some of them, they maybe don't believe that success is possible. Do you believe that you make a difference with these kids? And that's why I thought it was important to have Brooke up here, because a lot of times when we start to feel that we're not making a difference, that's where we can start to feel a little bit burnt out and disengaged. And that's what we're trying to loop in parents too with the parent night. Do our parents feel that they are part of the process? Do they feel that they can make a difference? And I have a lot of parents that I work with, and I probably work with hundreds of parents each month. I do a lot of parent consulting on parents that have kids with behavior issues and school refusal. And one thing the parents will say to me is, I just feel like I can't get any control. I can't get any momentum moving with this. How do we start to kind of make more of a positive impact? I'm gonna flip here. Are you guys seeing a lot of school avoidance? What do you think the number one reason is for the school avoidance? What, can you say it louder?
Fear of failure.
Fear of failure. Typically what we find too, and that's a great one, fear of failure. Typically, we look at reasons why kids don't come to school. A lot of times it's just, I feel so anxious or upset when I'm at school. I feel like I can't tolerate any kind of discomfort or failure. I feel like there's something pulling me away. I'd rather be doing video games or engaging in electronics. I feel more comfortable in that arena. Or possibly there could be substance use, or there could be some kind of trauma in the home. You might even have some cases where kids have to take care of siblings or things like that, where there's other things going on. I don't know how much that happens here, but we get all kinds of reasons. So one of the things I ask when I'm talking to parents that have students with school refusal is I do start off by saying, talk to me about what they're doing when they're not at school. What are some things that motivate them? And let's talk about what are some obstacles, and slowly start to transition them back.
In your experience, is it more social avoidance or academic?
It's all different. It's different across schools. I have a lot of kids that they believe if they're not in AP and honors classes, they're a failure, and they really struggle with that, and then they overtax themselves, like I said, and emotionally. Like if you can't handle criticism, you can't ask for help, and you're in like 3 AP classes, it's going to start to get tough, right? And so we look at, again, their stress levels, and a lot of times for kids when they're overloaded and the pressure is too much, they start to avoid. And I have a lot of kids that have video game addictions. I have a lot of kids that are on the gaming systems till 3 in the morning, and they get sucked into it, and they have a hard time coming off. The problem with school refusal kids is because they lack the skills that when they start to get behind in high school, it all snowballs, and so you have to help them have a plan. Now with kids with emotional issues and trauma, we don't want to necessarily take away the expectations. So you don't want to say to a kid, even your own kid at home, because you have anxiety, we know you can't handle anything, so we're going to lower the expectations. That's kind of a misconception. What we want to do, and you'll hear me say this, don't try harder, try different. We need to set different expectations, but keep them consistent. Kids don't, I had this conversation with mom yesterday. The kid was in middle school. The parent and the therapist came up with this whole thing that the kid couldn't handle leaving the house, the kid can't handle going to a restaurant, the kid can't handle going to school because of his OCD. I said, what message are we sending? What we want to do is we want to create a plan and hold the child to the expectations, but be consistent in terms of how we respond. And kids with trauma, the same thing. Something kids that have had a lot of trauma tell me all the time is school's really hard because you have to deal with so many different expectations from so many different adults. They don't do well with a lot of emotional responses. They do better when it's a little bit more consistent. I know we don't have a lot more time, so we'll go through some of this, but one thing I think right off the bat you can do with your students is helping them to understand that success doesn't mean getting straight A's. And I know that's weird to say to a school, but you think about what are the expectations, what defines success in your classroom. We know that getting straight A's isn't always a predictor of adult success. We know that some of the things that are a predictor of success are other things. How do you navigate? How do you problem solve? How do you maneuver through things? I have a lot of kids that have gotten straight A's all the way through high school that are really struggling to find themselves as adults. And I have a lot of kids that I worked with when they were in high school who really struggle with grades that are very successful now. Helping kids to understand it's okay to struggle. In fact, I teach people it's how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I tell all my kids I work with and parents, I want you to learn to struggle and I want you to struggle well. You getting a straight A in here is not the end all be all. It's a great thing, and I'm sure we all want our kids to get A's, but there's other things that have to happen, and emotional, mental health has to be at the forefront. One of the reasons we have a very, I'm going to flip to one more slide. This is something that if any of you get really into this stuff that you want to do, like in a team meeting or in a different situation, think about a student. Can anyone in here think of a student that they have a hard time with? You guys are so full of crap. Think about a student who's difficult for you, okay? Think about the behavior that the student exhibits that's maybe challenging for you. Think about that behavior that comes up that maybe, really gets under your skin. You might even find yourself thinking, God, this student has it out for me. What needs does that behavior reflect? When that student's engaging in the behavior, maybe they're shutting down, maybe they're being disrespectful to you, maybe they're avoiding. What do you think is behind that? What's going on for that student? Is it more of an emotional need? Does that student need help regulating? We know when we're disciplining students, we don't want to be disciplining students when they're not regulated. We don't want to be coming in and being authoritative. We don't want to be yelling at them, shaming them. Sarcasm doesn't work. You have to kind of bring it down and regulate with them. Is it more of a relationship? We know kids at this age, they care about peers more than they do about acceptance from adults. Or is it something maybe they need, like biologically, they need medicine, or they need food, or they need sleep, or something like that? And then how does the student connect to others in the classroom? And again, I have a couple kids that I work with, and they really don't connect that well. And I've even found myself thinking, gosh, maybe I'm not a right fit for this kid. But really, a lot of times, it's about the kid can't really connect to others. They just have a really hard time, just basic relationship and connecting. And I think it's going to get worse. I mean, the reality is kids are given electronics now as young as 1. I mean, how many of you have little kids in here? And some of your little kids might have their own iPads, you know? And so and that's not a bad thing, but what we're finding is these kids are getting less and less interaction. And they say that too. I mean, if you do have little kids, one thing I did with my oldest, which I don't know why I was really big into this, but I struggled with eye contact when I was younger, and I had struggled with confidence. And I remember when I had my older daughter, I was determined to help her with eye contact and confidence, and this is a true story. From the time she was 6 months old, 1 year old, every time I had a conversation with her, I made sure she looked at me in the eye, and I gave her my undivided attention. And through that time, it's interesting to, as it's evolved, I got a little bit lazier with my second, but the second one I tried, I did okay. But that older daughter now, if you talk to her, she will drop everything and look at you in the eye and have a conversation with you. It's interesting that we see what an impact some of the things that we do. And I laugh because if you have kids at home, you know this is true. You can teach them a bunch of stuff and they don't listen to half of it, but they will end up acting just like you. And so we model for our kids how to cope, how to prioritize mental and emotional health, how to set realistic expectations. And the best gift you can give to your students is by being there and being real with them and modeling. I'm not going to keep you guys too long. Do you guys have any questions? Who's driving the furthest away? Who's got the longest drive home? Where do you live, Heather Peterson? Oh, she's not here? She's still driving from this morning? I could talk for hours on this topic. Hopefully I can come back one day when we have more time. I'm passionate about this. This is one of my favorite things to talk about because I think we can make such an impact with our kids in the small ways that we don't even think about. So if you all have any questions, my information is in the PowerPoint. I'm going to let you guys go. I know it's snowy and some of you want to get early, but if you guys want more information or more flyers, they're going to send you this PowerPoint with this one flyer I made for you, and I will show you this as you're walking out. This is something I put together, and it's just a little bit of a handout, a tip sheet that if you really want to think about just different ways to think about the kids and different ways to respond. It's a questionnaire that I made that helps me stay on task when I'm working with groups. I know how stressful it can be. I ran groups in the hospital setting for 15 years. I know this isn't easy, and so I don't mean to make light of it, but one thing that's helped me as a parent and as a clinician is consistently getting my own emotional stuff in check. When I'm emotionally struggling, it becomes toxic to others and my responses. So I try to consistently think about where I'm at and engage in my own coping practices. One coping skill I'm going to share with you before I leave is this one. Behave your way to feeling better. So one of the things we do in therapy is we talk to people about we have to sometimes behave our way into feeling better. So if I'm really stressed or feeling emotional and I know that I'm about to go into a situation where I might be really frustrated, I visualize how I want the next 10 minutes to go and I literally behave my way into that ending. So I practice it consistently. So think about like if you know you're not in the best headspace, kind of get yourself grounded or get yourself centered, and then visualize how you want the next 10 or 15 minutes to go. Thank you guys, and I hope you have a nice, safe drive home.